March 17, 1943. The winter cold still gripped Berlin, though spring was supposedly approaching. Inside the imposing stone headquarters of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, located along the tree-lined Tirpitz-Ufer beside the Landwehr Canal, a scene was unfolding that would epitomize one of the most catastrophic intelligence failures in the history of modern warfare. A manila folder, stamped with the highest security classification, slammed onto the polished mahogany desk of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris with such force that coffee splashed from his delicate porcelain cup, staining intelligence reports that would have meant immediate execution if discovered by the Gestapo. The folder's label read simply, Tirpitz-Ufer 76 to 78 Berlin, a code designation that masked intelligence so explosive it threatened to unravel the entire Nazi narrative of inevitable German victory. Admiral Canaris, a figure of contradictions who had served German intelligence since the Great War, stood at his window overlooking the canal. The same canal where Rosa Luxemburg's murdered body had been dumped 24 years earlier during the brutal suppression of the Spartacist uprising. Now, in early 1943, as chief of German military intelligence, Canaris held in his trembling hands a report that challenged not merely Nazi propaganda, but the entire mathematical foundation upon which Germany's leaders had constructed their vision of triumph. The intelligence gathered through multiple independent channels across 3 continents painted a picture so staggering that it defied belief. According to intercepted communications, reports from agents still operating in Mexico City, intelligence from Spanish diplomats, and accounts from Swedish businessmen traveling through the American industrial heartland, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run manufacturing plant outside Detroit, Michigan, was producing one complete 4-engine B-24 Liberator heavy bomber every single hour. Think about that for a moment. Not every day, not every week, every hour. 1.5 million individual parts, 450,000 rivets, 30,000 separate components assembled into an 18-ton aircraft capable of carrying 4 tons of bombs across 1,000 miles, rolling off an assembly line faster than Germany could produce a simple Kubelwagen military vehicle. Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, standing at rigid attention before Canaris's desk, had spent 3 weeks triple-checking the intelligence through every available source. The numbers remained consistent. What neither man fully grasped in that moment was that this scene would trigger the most devastating intelligence failure in modern warfare, a systematic inability of German intelligence services to comprehend, believe, or effectively communicate the true scale of American industrial capacity to Nazi leadership, ultimately dooming the Third Reich through a fatal miscalculation of mathematical inevitability. This is a history documentary about how ideology blinds nations to reality, how cognitive bias destroys empires, and how the untold stories of World War II reveal lessons that echo through history to our present day. Before we journey deeper into this remarkable World War II history, if you're passionate about military history and untold stories of the Second World War like this one, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss these historical documentaries. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I love hearing from viewers around the world who share this passion for understanding the complexities of WWII history. Now, let's continue this extraordinary story of intelligence, ideology, and industrial might. The collapse of German intelligence regarding American production capacity had not begun in March 1943. Its roots stretched back 2 full years earlier to the period immediately following Germany's declaration of war against the United States in December 1941. To understand how thoroughly German leadership rejected accurate intelligence, we must first understand the ideological framework through which Nazi leaders viewed America and democracy itself. The Nazi worldview, constructed on pseudoscientific racial theories and authoritarian principles, held that democratic societies were inherently weak, inefficient, and incapable of sustained industrial or military effort. This wasn't merely propaganda for public consumption. The highest levels of Nazi leadership genuinely believed that racial diversity weakened nations, that democratic debate paralyzed decision-making, and that societies which allowed women and minorities significant roles in industry and government were fundamentally inferior to racially pure authoritarian states. In the summer of 1941, months before Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, Luftwaffe General Karl Koller had presented Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring with detailed intelligence reports from Germany's military attaché in Washington, General Friedrich von Boerthicher. Von Boerthicher, who had served in the United States Capitol since 1933, maintained extensive contacts within American military and industrial circles. His reports to Berlin stated clearly that American aircraft production was rapidly approaching 2,000 planes per month and would likely exceed that figure once war production fully mobilized. Von Boerthicher, despite his own Nazi sympathies, was a trained military professional who understood industrial capacity. He had toured American automobile factories, visited steel mills, observed the vast infrastructure of American industry. His reports were detailed, specific, and entirely accurate. Hermann Göring's response became legendary among German intelligence officers. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle of skepticism, but a full, contemptuous laugh. Göring, who had once been a decorated fighter pilot in the Great War, but had grown increasingly detached from military reality, as he descended into drug addiction and delusions of grandeur, declared that Americans could only build refrigerators and razor blades, not military aircraft. To Göring and many Nazi leaders, America was a nation of shopkeepers and consumers, racially mongrelized, politically divided, militarily incompetent. How could such a society possibly compete with the industrial might of the German Reich, forged through years of rearmament under centralized authoritarian control? The idea seemed preposterous within the Nazi ideological framework. 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, when Hitler made the fateful decision to declare war on the United States, Göring met with the Führer at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. According to later testimony from participants, Göring assured Hitler that American production claims were pure bluff. "The Americans are bluffing," Göring told Hitler with absolute confidence. "Their democracy makes them weak. Their mongrel population makes them inefficient. Their Jews make them corrupt. They cannot possibly produce what they claim." Hitler, who held similar views about American racial inferiority and democratic weakness, accepted this assessment without serious challenge. Both men believed that America's entry into the war would make little practical difference. Germany would crush the Soviet Union in 1942, consolidate control of Europe, and then deal with whatever minor nuisance America might present. This fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial capacity was not limited to Göring and Hitler. It pervaded the highest levels of Nazi leadership and military command. The Nazi racial worldview simply could not accommodate the reality of American industrial democracy. Yet even as these leaders dismissed American capabilities, German intelligence officers in the field were gathering increasingly alarming data that contradicted every assumption of Nazi ideology. By March 1943, when Canaris received that explosive folder, German intelligence networks across the Americas had been reporting for months something that defied every tenet of Nazi racial theory and economic understanding. The reports came from multiple independent sources spread across 3 continents, all saying the same impossible thing. Ford's Willow Run plant alone was producing more heavy bombers each month than all of Germany's aircraft factories combined. Let's understand the sources of this intelligence and why it was so credible to professional intelligence officers, even as it seemed impossible to Nazi ideologues. Oberstleutnant Nikolaus Ritter, head of Abwehr's air intelligence section known as Abteilung Luft, had spent 3 intensive weeks in early 1943 analyzing data flowing in from agents across the Western Hemisphere. Ritter was no ordinary intelligence officer, a former Lufthansa commercial pilot who had lived in the United States for 10 years during the 1920s and early 30s. Ritter understood American industrial capacity better than perhaps any other German officer of his rank. His apartment in Manhattan during the Roaring Twenties had overlooked the construction of the Chrysler Building. He had watched with his own eyes as American workers erected the world's tallest building in less than 2 years, a feat of engineering and construction that seemed almost superhuman by European standards of the era. Ritter brought a unique perspective to analyzing intelligence about American production. Unlike Nazi ideologues who had never set foot in America, Ritter had lived among Americans, had seen their factories, understood their industrial culture. When he studied the reports coming from Mexico City, from Madrid, from Stockholm, from Lisbon, from Buenos Aires, Ritter recognized patterns consistent with everything he knew about American industrial methods. His report to Admiral Canaris was stark and unambiguous. "Herr Admiral, if these numbers are correct, and I believe they are, then Germany has already lost the war. It is now only a question of mathematics and time." This was not defeatism. This was mathematical reality from an intelligence professional who understood what the numbers meant. The intelligence reached Berlin through circuitous and often dangerous routes, each more precarious than the last. Georg Nikolaus, running Abwehr's primary intelligence network in Mexico City under the cover name Georg Nikolaus, had cultivated an extensive network of sources among American businessmen who traveled frequently between Detroit's industrial heart and Mexico's oil fields. These American executives spoke casually at social gatherings of the miracles they witnessed, completely unaware that their dinner conversations were being carefully transcribed by German agents trained in the arts of elicitation and social engineering. On February 3, 1943, an American oil company executive named Harold Morrison attended a reception at the German-Mexican Commerce Association in Mexico City. The association, ostensibly promoting legitimate trade between German and Mexican business interests, served as a front for German intelligence gathering operations. After several tequilas loosened his tongue, Morrison began enthusiastically describing his recent tour of the Willow Run facility, a tour arranged by Ford Motor Company executives eager to showcase to potential investors the company's capabilities for fulfilling massive government defense contracts. "Gentlemen," Morrison said, animated and excited, unaware that Wolfgang Blau, a German agent operating under deep cover as an Argentine leather merchant, was memorizing every word while appearing to be just another interested businessman. "What I saw at Willow Run defies description. The assembly line is over a mile long. The building is so vast that clouds literally form inside it from the humidity and temperature changes, and it sometimes rains within the factory itself. They have 42,000 workers on site, including thousands of women, including Negro women, building the most complex machine ever created by human hands." Morrison, caught up in enthusiasm and alcohol, pulled out a pencil and began sketching on a cloth napkin. "The B-24 Liberator bomber has 2 bomb bays, each capable of holding 4,000 pounds of ordnance, 4 engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower. But here's the remarkable thing about how they build them," Morrison continued, sketching crude diagrams. "They produce them in sections, what Ford calls sub-assemblies, that converge like rivers flowing into the sea. Wing sections arrive from one direction, fuselages from another, tail assemblies from a third. They meet at precise points along the assembly line at exactly the right moment. It's like watching a ballet performed by machines and human beings working in perfect synchronization." Wolfgang Blau, playing his role perfectly, asked with studied casualness, "But surely such complexity means frequent breakdowns, production delays, quality control problems?" Morrison laughed, almost mockingly. "That's what Consolidated Aircraft thought. They built the original B-24 design, and they mocked Ford when Ford said they could mass produce them. The traditional aircraft manufacturers said you can't build planes like cars, that it's impossible, that each aircraft requires skilled craftsmen working carefully over months. But Henry Ford and his production chief Charles Sorensen broke the bomber down into 60,000 separate operations. Each worker performs the same task over and over and over. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her children now installs hydraulic lines in the tail section with precision that would take a traditional craftsman months to learn. Ford trains these workers in days, not months. It's revolutionary." This intelligence from Mexico City was far from the only source. Perhaps the most detailed intelligence came through Francisco Franco's Spain, which maintained official neutrality while secretly providing intelligence to Germany in exchange for crucial tungsten shipments that Spanish industry desperately needed. Colonel José Ungría, Spanish military attaché in Washington, maintained cordial relationships with American aircraft manufacturers while covertly funneling detailed intelligence to German handlers. Spain's position was delicate. Franco owed his victory in the Spanish Civil War largely to German and Italian military assistance, yet he also understood that Spain was too weak and war-exhausted to directly enter the Second World War. Franco played both sides, maintaining diplomatic relations with the Allies while providing intelligence to the Axis, a dangerous game that required considerable skill. In March 1943, Colonel Ungria attended a reception at the Argentine embassy in Washington, one of those glittering diplomatic affairs where political rivals and military representatives mixed socially under the veneer of civilized conversation. At this reception, Ungria was introduced to Charles Sorensen, Ford Motor Company's legendary production chief and the primary architect of the Willow Run facility. Sorensen, believing he was speaking to a representative of a neutral nation that might purchase American aircraft after the war ended, spoke with remarkable freedom about the plant's capabilities and Ford's revolutionary production methods. He had no idea that every word would be encrypted and transmitted to Berlin within 2 weeks. "Colonel," Sorensen said, warming to his subject as engineers and industrialists often do when discussing their achievements, "when I first visited Consolidated Aircraft's San Diego plant back in 1940, they were building B-24 bombers outdoors in the California sunshine, each one different from the last, taking 180,000 man-hours per aircraft. Skilled craftsmen swarmed over each plane, and production was slow, expensive, and inefficient. I knew immediately that we could do better by applying mass production principles that Ford had perfected over decades of automobile manufacturing." Colonel Ungria, playing his role as an interested military engineer, pressed for specific details. Sorensen, proud of his revolutionary achievement and eager to explain it, obliged with remarkable specificity. "I spent one night in my hotel room in San Diego sketching out the entire production flow on hotel stationery," Sorensen continued. "The vision was clear. We would build bombers exactly like we build automobiles, not by having teams of workers swarm over a stationary aircraft, but by moving the aircraft past stationary workstations where each worker performs specific tasks repeatedly, achieving perfection through repetition and muscle memory. The whole concept of interchangeable parts and moving assembly lines, which revolutionized automobile manufacturing, would now revolutionize aircraft production." The Spanish attaché asked about workforce challenges, about whether such complexity could really be mastered by ordinary workers. Sorensen's answer would have profound implications. "We built an apprentice school at Willow Run that trains 8,000 workers weekly," Sorensen replied. "Women now comprise 40% of our workforce, and they're actually better at certain detailed work. Smaller hands for tight spaces, more patience for repetitive precision tasks. We have Negro workers operating sophisticated machinery, managing complex operations. We have boys of 16 managing supply logistics. Democracy, Colonel, means utilizing all available human resources, regardless of traditional limitations. When you need to produce aircraft to win a war, you can't afford to waste half your population." This statement, had it been fully understood by Nazi leadership, should have shattered their entire racial ideology. Here was direct evidence that inclusive democracy, that racial diversity, that women's participation in industry wasn't weakness, but enormous strength. But ideology is a powerful filter, and inconvenient truths are easily dismissed. The intelligence continued flowing into Berlin through multiple channels. Swedish engineer Erik Lundberg visited Willow Run in March 1943 as part of a technical delegation examining American industrial methods. Sweden's neutrality made it a valuable conduit for intelligence flowing in both directions. Lundberg's detailed technical report, which Swedish intelligence shared with German contacts, provided independent verification of everything German agents had reported. "The plant operates with efficiency that defies traditional European understanding of aircraft manufacturing," Lundberg wrote in his report. "They utilize approximately 1,600 specialized machine tools, many designed for single specific operations. The capital investment is staggering, perhaps $200 million for tooling alone, more than most nations spend on their entire air forces. Even Japanese intelligence, intercepted by German signals intelligence units, provided corroboration. Commander Toshikazu Omi's coded message to Tokyo, which German cryptographers had broken and translated, stated bluntly, "This single factory produces more aircraft monthly than entire Japanese aviation industry. American industrial capacity exceeds all previous intelligence estimates by a factor of 3 to 5. Implications for Pacific War are catastrophic." When your enemy's enemy confirms your own intelligence, that's powerful validation. By April 1943, German intelligence had assembled comprehensive documentation from 17 independent sources across multiple countries and continents, all confirming the same production rate. The numbers were no longer debatable among intelligence professionals. Willow Run alone was producing 650 B-24 bombers monthly at peak capacity, with total American B-24 production across all plants exceeding 1,400 aircraft per month. To put this in perspective, Germany's entire aircraft industry, which had been operating under war mobilization since 1939, was producing approximately 1,500 aircraft per month total across all types, fighters and bombers and transport planes and trainers combined. One American factory, one single building, was producing nearly as many heavy bombers as Germany's entire aviation industry produced total aircraft. The implications were mathematically inescapable. Admiral Canaris, desperate for ground truth that might break through the wall of ideological denial in Berlin, authorized one of the war's most famous and ill-fated operations. Operation Pastorius, the insertion of saboteurs into the United States via submarine, had objectives beyond simple sabotage. George John Dash, leader of one of the two four-man teams, had lived in America for 20 years before returning to Germany in 1939. He spoke perfect American English, understood American culture, and had worked in American factories. His secret orders from Canaris, separate from the sabotage mission that was his team's official objective, were to gather detailed intelligence on aircraft production before conducting any sabotage operations. Canaris wanted photographs, employee counts, shipping records, documentary proof that might force Göring and Hitler to accept reality. In the early morning darkness of June 13, 1942, Dash's team came ashore at Amagansett Beach on Long Island, having been transported across the Atlantic aboard U-202. Within days of landing, tormented by the implications of his mission and what he already knew about American industrial capacity from his years living in the United States, Dash made a decision that shocked both German and American intelligence services. He surrendered to the FBI. During his lengthy interrogation, Dash revealed something that stunned his American captors and provided extraordinary insight into German intelligence thinking. "Canaris himself told me that Berlin doesn't believe your production figures," Dash explained to FBI interrogators. "They think Willow Run is propaganda, that the numbers are impossible exaggerations designed to intimidate Germany and Japan. He wanted me to obtain photographs, employee documentation, shipping records, physical proof that would force Reichsmarschall Göring to accept reality, because verbal reports and statistical analysis weren't working." FBI Special Agent Charles Lanman asked incredulously, "They don't believe we're producing a bomber every hour?" Dash laughed bitterly, the laugh of a man caught between two worlds. "Agent Lanman, I lived here for 2 decades. I've seen your automobile factories, watched American industrial methods firsthand. I tried to tell German intelligence officers that if Ford could produce a complete automobile every minute before the war, they could certainly produce a bomber every hour during it. They accused me of being defeatist, of being corrupted by American propaganda, of losing faith in German victory. To question American production figures in Berlin is to question Nazi ideology itself." The confrontation came on April 20, 1943, Adolf Hitler's 54th birthday, a date that had become an unofficial holiday in Nazi Germany, marked by elaborate celebrations and military pageantry. Admiral Canaris personally traveled to Carinhall, Reichsmarschall Göring's ostentatious hunting estate north of Berlin, to present the accumulated intelligence directly to Germany's second most powerful man. The meeting would become legendary, among surviving German intelligence officers as the ultimate example of ideology trumping reality. Canaris had brought everything: photographs obtained through Spanish diplomatic channels, intercepted documents, reports from dozens of independent sources across 3 continents, statistical analyses prepared by Germany's best economic intelligence experts. He spread them across Göring's massive oak table like a gambler showing cards that would lose the game. "Herr Reichsmarschall," Canaris began carefully, knowing that his life might depend on how this conversation went, "we now have confirmation from 17 independent sources operating across the Americas and Europe. The Ford Willow Run plant is producing 1 B-24 Liberator every hour at peak production capacity. They achieved this rate consistently since January and appear capable of sustaining it indefinitely. This is not propaganda. This is documented fact verified through multiple intelligence disciplines. Hermann Göring, who by this point in the war weighed over 280 pounds, bloated by drug addiction and increasingly detached from military reality, picked up one of the photographs showing the assembly line stretching into the distance. His response epitomized everything wrong with Nazi decision-making. "Canaris," Göring said with undisguised contempt, "do you take me for a fool? These are obviously wooden mock-ups, props constructed for propaganda photographs. The Americans want us to believe they can build aircraft like sausages rolling off a conveyor belt. This Willow Run plant probably produces 50 bombers monthly at most, and even that is optimistic. You've been deceived by American psychological warfare operations." Canaris, desperate to break through this wall of denial, pulled out another document, an intercepted shipping manifest from the Pennsylvania Railroad showing aluminum shipments to the Willow Run facility. "Herr Reichsmarschall, they're consuming 16 million pounds of aluminum monthly at this one plant. That's more than our entire German monthly aluminum production. The mathematics are inescapable." Göring's response revealed the depth of Nazi ideological blindness. "Then where do they get this aluminum?" he demanded mockingly. "From their Negro workers? From their women riveters? Canaris, you've been deceived by American propaganda. A democracy cannot outproduce the Third Reich. Their racial inferiors cannot outwork our Aryan workers. Their chaotic political system cannot match our efficient, centralized planning. These numbers are impossible, therefore they are false. I will not present this defeatist nonsense to the Führer." 1 week later, Canaris was summoned to the Wolf's Lair to brief Adolf Hitler personally. The meeting included General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of Wehrmacht High Command, and Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels. Hitler, studying maps of the Eastern Front where German forces were preparing for Operation Citadel, the massive offensive that would become the Battle of Kursk, listened with visible impatience as Canaris presented the intelligence about American production. "Mein Führer," Canaris said, knowing he was risking execution for defeatism but feeling duty-bound to present the truth. "If the Americans are producing 1,400 B-24 bombers monthly, plus equal numbers of B-17 flying fortresses, plus their fighter aircraft production, plus British production continuing, then the aerial bombardment of the Reich will soon exceed our defensive capabilities regardless of how many fighters we produce. The mathematical reality is inescapable." Hitler's response was entirely characteristic of his leadership style, dismissing uncomfortable reality in favor of ideological certainty. "Admiral, the Americans are capable of mass production of simple goods, automobiles and refrigerators and consumer items. But a heavy bomber is not a car. It requires precision engineering, skilled craftsmanship, dedication to quality. When it took us 6 years to properly prepare for war, they claim to have achieved miraculous production in 16 months. It's impossible. Their democracy makes them disorganized. Their racial mixing makes them incompetent. Their Jews corrupt their industry. They cannot possibly produce what they claim." General Jodl, who was more analytically minded than most Nazi leaders, studied Canaris's figures carefully and attempted a mathematical calculation. "Mein Führer, even if we accept only 1/4 of these figures as accurate, the implications for our strategic position—" Hitler interrupted him sharply. "The figures are false. The Americans entered the war in December 1941. Building this miraculous factory and achieving this production level in such time is physically impossible. Canaris, you will review your intelligence sources and determine which have been compromised by Allied deception operations. This meeting is concluded. Unknown to anyone present at that meeting, Canaris had obtained something even more compelling than statistics and reports. Through contacts in Swiss intelligence, who maintained relationships with both Allied and Axis intelligence services as part of Switzerland's precarious neutrality, Canaris had acquired film footage of Willow Run in full operation. The film, smuggled out of the United States through a complex intelligence operation and transported to Berlin via Spanish diplomatic pouches, showed 5 minutes of the Willow Run assembly line in complete operation. Late one night, Canaris and his deputy Hans Oster, both men who would later be executed for their involvement in plots against Hitler, watched the film in a locked room deep within Abwehr headquarters. No one else was present. The camera traveled along the entire mile-long assembly line, and what it showed was undeniable. B-24 bombers in every stage of construction moved steadily past workstations. Workers, men and women, black and white, performed their assigned tasks with mechanical precision. A large clock visible in several shots confirmed the timing. The production rate was exactly as intelligence reports had stated. "My God," Oster whispered as the film played. "It's all true, every report, every statistic, every seemingly impossible claim. It's all true." Admiral Canaris sat in silence for a long moment after the film ended, then did something that reveals the impossible position of honest intelligence officers in totalitarian regimes. He took his cigarette lighter and set the film on fire, watching it burn in a metal wastebasket. "We cannot show this to them," Canaris said quietly as the flames consumed the evidence. "They would accuse us of creating fake footage or brand us as traitors, spreading defeatism. We would be arrested within hours and executed within days. The truth has become treason in the Third Reich." This moment encapsulates one of history's great tragedies. German intelligence had obtained photographic evidence of American production capacity, clear proof that should have forced strategic reassessment, and that evidence was destroyed because presenting truth had become more dangerous than remaining ignorant. In November 1943, 8 months after Canaris's failed attempts to convince Nazi leadership, German intelligence obtained aerial photographs of the Willow Run facility, taken by a Spanish diplomat who flew over the Detroit area during a commercial flight. Photo analysts at Abwehr headquarters spent weeks meticulously studying these images using the best photographic intelligence techniques available at the time. Their conclusions, detailed in a formal intelligence assessment, were precise and damning. The parking lot surrounding Willow Run contained approximately 12,000 automobiles, indicating 3 full shifts of workers operating around the clock. Completed B-24 Liberators were clearly visible at the adjacent airfield, 47 aircraft ready for delivery in a single photograph. The assembly line was partially visible through the factory's skylights, with aircraft spaced exactly as human intelligence sources had reported. Railway sidings showed dozens of freight cars delivering raw materials and components. The assessment concluded. Photographic intelligence confirms human intelligence from all sources. Production rate appears accurate. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment of air defense priorities and consideration of negotiated settlement before American bombing capacity becomes overwhelming. Hermann Göring, shown the photographs by increasingly desperate intelligence officers, dismissed them as clever American photographic manipulation, probably created using scale models photographed to look like full-sized aircraft and factories. Reality itself had become unbelievable to Nazi leadership. But there was one Nazi leader who understood industrial production at a level that Göring and Hitler never could. Dr. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, and the only senior Nazi with genuine understanding of modern industrial processes, secretly obtained copies of the American intelligence reports. Speer had transformed German war production through rationalization and efficiency improvements, and he understood what industrial capacity meant in strategic terms. His diary entry for May 15, 1943, discovered after the war and preserved in archives, reveals his private despair. "If the Willow Run figures are even half accurate, we face not military defeat, but industrial annihilation. They produce more aircraft in a single month than we produce in an entire year. but I cannot speak this truth to the Führer. To do so would be my immediate death warrant. We are locked into a war we cannot win, led by men who refuse to accept mathematical reality. Even Speer, with his technical understanding and access to Hitler, felt powerless to present uncomfortable truths to leadership that had made ideology more important than reality. Another economist who grasped the implications was Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, head of SD Inland, the domestic intelligence branch of the SS, and a trained economist before the war. Ohlendorf analyzed American economic data obtained through neutral countries and prepared a comprehensive report for Heinrich Himmler in December 1943. His report was mathematically stark and strategically terrifying. The Ford Motor Company's peacetime production in 1941 was 1.1 million vehicles annually. They have converted this massive capacity almost entirely to bomber production. At current rates of American manufacturing expansion, by June 1944, the Americans will have produced enough B-24 Liberators alone to drop our entire 1940 London bombing campaign tonnage every single day indefinitely. There is no defense against this scale of production. Mathematics cannot be defeated by will. On Christmas Eve 1943, as German soldiers froze on the Eastern Front and Allied bombing intensified over German cities, Admiral Canaris received intelligence showing American production projections for 1944. The numbers seemed like something from science fiction. B-24 Liberators, 18,000 units. B-17, Flying Fortresses, 12,000 units. B-29, Super Fortresses, a new bomber even larger than previous designs, 1,000 units. Fighter aircraft, 40,000 units. Total projected production for 1944, 86,000 military aircraft. This meant America alone would produce more aircraft in a single year than Germany, Japan, Italy, and Britain combined had produced during the entire war to that point. Adolf Hitler's response when these figures were presented to him by increasingly desperate intelligence officers captured the essence of Nazi cognitive dissonance. The Americans claim they will produce more aircraft in 1944 than all nations have produced in all of aviation history. It's absurd fantasy. They are trying to frighten us with propaganda. Germany will prevail through superior will and racial superiority. By February 1944, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was removed from his position as chief of the Abwehr, officially for administrative reorganization, but actually because he was suspected of defeatism and possible treason for his persistent attempts to present uncomfortable intelligence to Nazi leadership. His replacement, Walter Schellenberg, was a committed Nazi loyalist who understood that career survival depended on telling leaders what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to know. But reality, as it always does, was approaching rapidly. Reality doesn't care about ideology, and mathematics cannot be defeated by denial. On February 20th through 25th, 1944, the United States 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, known to history as Big Week, a coordinated series of massive bombing raids specifically targeting German aircraft production facilities. Over 6 days, more than 1,000 American heavy bombers, escorted by hundreds of long-range fighters, struck German factories with precision and overwhelming force. In those 6 days, American bombers dropped more explosive tonnage on German targets than the Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire 10-month Blitz campaign. Luftwaffe fighter pilot Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most decorated aces and an officer known for speaking uncomfortable truths, confronted Göring after the raids. "Herr Reichsmarschall, I personally counted over 800 bombers in a single formation. These planes are not propaganda. They are real, and they are dropping real bombs that are destroying our aircraft factories. We cannot defend against this scale of attack." The climax came on June 6, 1944, D-Day, when Allied forces invaded Normandy. Over 11,000 Allied aircraft appeared in the skies over France that day, achieving absolute air superiority that made German military operations nearly impossible. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force in the world, could muster fewer than 300 fighters in response. Field Marshal Hugo Sperle, commanding Luftwaffe forces in the West, sent a desperate message to Berlin that afternoon. The enemy's aerial superiority is absolute and overwhelming. Our intelligence was correct all along. We were not deceived by the Americans. We deceived ourselves by refusing to believe intelligence that contradicted our ideology. By April 1944, the Willow Run plant achieved its maximum production rate, a rate that would have seemed impossible just 3 years earlier when the plant was still under construction. That month, 42,331 employees working 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days per week, produced 453 complete B-24 Liberator bombers in 468 hours of operation. This production rate equaled 1 finished aircraft every 63 minutes on average, with peak efficiency reaching 1 aircraft every hour during optimal conditions. The workforce composition would have shattered Nazi racial ideology completely if Nazi leaders had truly understood it. 11,000 women comprised 26% of the workforce, performing tasks from riveting to hydraulic systems installation to final assembly checks. 3,800 African-American workers, representing 9% of the workforce, operated complex machinery, managed logistics, and performed skilled manufacturing tasks. 1,200 disabled workers, representing 3% of the workforce, proved that physical limitations didn't prevent valuable contributions to war production. This demographic breakdown represented everything Nazi ideology claimed was impossible. The supposedly inferior races and weaker sexes were outproducing the German master race by orders of magnitude, not through some temporary fluke, but through systematic application of industrial democracy and inclusive mobilization of all available human resources. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, as Allied investigators combed through captured German archives and interrogated surviving Nazi officials, the full scope of the intelligence failure became clear. Walter Schellenberg, testifying at the Nuremberg trials, provided extraordinary insight into how German intelligence had functioned under Nazi ideology. We knew the truth about American production capacity by early 1943. Every professional intelligence officer understood that the numbers were accurate and verified through multiple independent sources. But to report this truth honestly was to risk immediate execution for defeatism. Officers who persisted in presenting uncomfortable intelligence were removed from their positions, or worse. The intelligence services became echo chambers, telling leadership what it wanted to hear rather than what it needed to know. Hans Bernd Gisevius, an Abwehr officer who had worked closely with Canaris and who managed to escape to Switzerland before the war's end, wrote in his post-war memoirs a passage that captures the tragedy perfectly. The catastrophe was not that we lacked intelligence about American production. We were drowning in accurate intelligence from dozens of independent sources. The catastrophe was that our leadership systematically refused to believe intelligence that contradicted their racial ideology and their conviction of inevitable German victory. Truth became treason, and reality became defeatism. The German intelligence officers who tried most persistently to report the truth about American production paid terrible prices for their integrity. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was arrested in July 1944 following the failed July 20th assassination attempt against Hitler. Though Canaris's direct involvement in the plot was limited, his persistent defeatism and his extensive intelligence contacts made him suspect. He was executed by hanging at Flossenbürg concentration camp on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, on direct orders from Hitler, who wanted to punish those he blamed for Germany's collapse. Hans Oster, Canaris's deputy and closest collaborator, who had watched with Canaris as that film of Willow Run burned, was executed the same day at Flossenbürg for his involvement in resistance activities. Alexis von Roener, head of German Army Intelligence's Foreign Armies West Section, who had consistently reported accurate assessments of Allied strength and capabilities, was arrested after the July 20th plot and executed in October 1944. Hans Bernd Gisevius escaped to Switzerland and survived the war, spending the rest of his life documenting the tragedy of German intelligence under Nazi ideology. These were not traitors. These were professional intelligence officers trying to provide accurate information to leadership that preferred comforting lies to uncomfortable truths. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after the war to assess American bombing effectiveness and industrial production, confirmed in meticulous detail what German intelligence had reported. Willow Run produced 8,685 B-24 Liberator bombers between 1942 and 1945. Peak production reached 650 aircraft monthly at maximum efficiency. The sustained rate of one bomber per hour was maintained for multiple months during peak production. Total cost per aircraft dropped from $238,000 early in production to $137,000 by war's end, as mass production techniques improved efficiency. Albert Speer, interrogated extensively by American and British investigators after his capture, was asked directly why Germany had refused to believe its own intelligence about American production capacity. His answer reveals the heart of the failure. To accept that Ford could produce a bomber every hour using women and Negroes and 16-year-old boys was to accept that our entire worldview was fundamentally wrong. It meant accepting that democracy wasn't weak but strong, that racial diversity didn't create weakness but enormous strength, that women could perform work we insisted only men could do, that inclusive societies were more powerful than exclusive ones. It would mean accepting that we had started a war we could never possibly win against an opponent we never truly understood. Who among us would tell Adolf Hitler that? Who would volunteer for execution by speaking such truth? Rose Monroe, who became famous as the real-life inspiration for Rosie the Riveter after being featured in a promotional film about war production, operated a rivet gun on the B-24 assembly line at Willow Run throughout the war. She represented thousands of women who had never worked in industry before Pearl Harbor, but who mastered complex manufacturing tasks within weeks. In a 1984 interview when Monroe was in her 60s, she reflected on her war work with characteristic modesty. "We knew we were building something important. Every rivet we drove was going to help end the war and bring our boys home. We worked double shifts sometimes, sleeping in our cars in the parking lot between shifts because we didn't want to waste time driving home. We had brothers and husbands and sweethearts flying these planes we built, so every aircraft had to be perfect." The German intelligence failure regarding Willow Run had catastrophic strategic consequences that rippled through every aspect of German war planning. Fighter production priorities were distorted because German leadership didn't understand the scale of bombing they would face, leading Germany to continue producing bombers for offensive operations until late 1944, when those resources should have been directed entirely to defensive fighters. Resource allocation was systematically wrong, as Germany wasted precious materials and industrial capacity on wonder weapons like the V-2 rocket instead of practical defensive systems that might have mitigated the bombing campaign. Strategic planning was based on faulty assumptions, with operations planned for facing hundreds of bombers when thousands would actually appear. Diplomatic efforts toward negotiated peace were delayed because German leadership didn't understand that defeat was mathematically certain by early 1944, leading to unnecessary prolongation of the war and millions of additional deaths. When German economists analyzing captured American documents after the war calculated the true scale of the disparity, the numbers were staggering. Willow Run alone cost $200 million to build and equip, equivalent to roughly $3 billion in current terms. Germany's entire aircraft industry investment from 1933 through 1945 totaled approximately $400 million equivalent. One American factory cost half as much as Germany's entire aviation industry. Willow Run's floor space covered 3.5 million square feet of manufacturing area. All German aircraft factories combined totaled approximately 8 million square feet, meaning this single American factory was nearly half the size of Germany's entire industry. Willow Run's electrical consumption reached 2.5 million kilowatt-hours monthly during peak production. The Americans had built a single factory that consumed more electricity than entire German cities, powered by infrastructure that Germany couldn't begin to match. The final accounting, compiled from American, British, and German records after the war, revealed the complete picture. Total B-24 Liberators produced by all American manufacturers, 18,188 aircraft. Willow Run alone produced 8,685, nearly half of all B-24s ever built. Total B-17 Flying Fortresses produced 12,731. Total American military aircraft produced from 1940 through 1945. 303,717 aircraft of all types. Total German military aircraft produced from 1940 through 1945. 94,700 aircraft of all types. The United States produced 3.2 times more aircraft than Germany, while simultaneously fighting a two-ocean war against both Germany and Japan, maintaining massive ground forces, supplying allies through Lend-Lease, and building the atomic bomb. Military historians analyzing this intelligence failure in the decades since the war have concluded it represents one of the most consequential failures in military history, not because intelligence wasn't collected, but because accurate intelligence was systematically rejected. Dr. Gerhard Weinberg, one of the world's preeminent historians of World War II, concluded in his analysis, German intelligence accurately assessed American production capacity by early 1943. Multiple independent sources provided detailed, verified information. Had this intelligence been believed and acted upon, Germany might have sought negotiated peace 2 years earlier, potentially saving millions of lives and preventing some of the war's worst atrocities that occurred in its final desperate years. The story of Germany's intelligence failure regarding Willow Run carries profound lessons that resonate far beyond World War II history. Cognitive bias can cause accurate intelligence to be rejected if it contradicts core beliefs and assumptions, a problem that affects decision-makers in all eras. Ideological blindness can cause political ideology to override mathematical reality, leading to catastrophic miscalculations with generational consequences. Systemic failure occurs when intelligent systems that punish unwelcome truth inevitably receive comfortable lies, creating dangerous feedback loops where leaders become increasingly divorced from reality. Fatal miscalculation follows when underestimating opponents based on prejudice and preconception leads to strategic errors that cannot be corrected once war begins. At the 1985 dedication of the Yankee Air Museum at the site of the former Willow Run plant, an extraordinary meeting occurred that symbolized the gulf between ideology and reality that had characterized the war. Roswell Monroe, then 67 years old and still sharp as ever, met former Luftwaffe pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel, who had survived the war as Germany's most decorated pilot. Their conversation, recorded by journalists covering the ceremony, captured something essential. Rudel asked, still trying to understand after 40 years, "How did you build so many aircraft so fast? We were told it was impossible, that democracy made you weak and inefficient." Monroe, with characteristic directness, answered in a way that explained everything. "Honey, we just went to work every day and did our jobs. Nothing fancy, nothing magical. We punched in, built bombers, punched out. We had a cause we believed in, freedom to fight for, and people we loved to protect. Democracy isn't complicated. It's just free people working together doing their best because they choose to, not because someone forces them. That's more powerful than you ever imagined." Rudel's response was somber and reflective. "We were told that democracy made you weak, that your diversity made you inefficient, that women couldn't do men's work, that racial minorities were inferior. We were told lies by leaders who needed those lies to justify their ideology and their war, and those lies killed millions of people who deserved better." In the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, as American and Soviet troops met amid the rubble of Hitler's shattered Reich, American intelligence officers discovered one final document in the abandoned files of German military intelligence. It was a report on Willow Run production, dated April 20th, 1945, Adolf Hitler's last birthday, written just days before his suicide in the Führer bunker. The report, never delivered to any Nazi leader, because by then there was no functioning government left to receive it, reads like an epitaph for an empire destroyed by its own willful blindness. Willow Run production confirmed at all levels. Our agents reported this truth 2 years ago. We were not believed by leadership. Germany dies not from lack of military skill, not from shortage of courage, not from insufficient sacrifice by our people. Germany dies from fundamental lack of wisdom to believe intelligence that contradicted what we wish to be true. Let future generations learn that reality does not bend to ideology, that mathematics does not yield to mythology, that truth ignored becomes tragedy inevitable. The report was never delivered because by April 20th, 1945, Adolf Hitler was trapped in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, his 1,000-year Reich reduced to a few city blocks of rubble. Days later, he would commit suicide, and within weeks Germany would surrender unconditionally. The verdict of history on this intelligence failure is unambiguous and damning. German intelligence collection was professionally excellent, with agents gathering accurate, detailed, verified information from multiple independent sources across 3 continents. German intelligence acceptance was catastrophically poor, with leadership systematically rejecting accurate information that contradicted ideological preconceptions. In that failure to believe uncomfortable truths lies a warning that echoes across history to all nations and all eras. Reality doesn't care what you believe. Reality doesn't negotiate or compromise. Those who deny reality in favor of ideology, who choose comforting lies over uncomfortable truths, who build systems that punish honest assessment and reward pleasant deception, will ultimately be destroyed by the reality they refuse to acknowledge. Willow Run built more than bombers during those intense years of wartime production. It built proof that democracy works effectively and powerfully when mobilized. It proved that diversity creates strength rather than weakness when all people are given opportunity. It demonstrated that freedom produces extraordinary results when people work toward shared purpose. It showed that inclusive societies can outperform exclusive ones when human potential is fully utilized. German intelligence officers counted every aircraft that rolled off that mile-long assembly line. They documented every shift, verified every production rate, confirmed every seemingly impossible claim. German leaders believed none of it until thousands of those aircraft appeared in the skies over Germany, dropping bombs that demolished the Reich that ideology had built but reality destroyed. And that disbelief, that systematic rejection of truth in favor of ideology, killed the Third Reich as surely as any bomb dropped from the sky.